Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome again from all of us at New Zealand Christians in Science and ISCAST. I am Nicola Hogarth-Cregan, the co-director of New Zealand Christians in Science. And we all look forward to another night of fascinating theology and science, this time on the subject of ancient light. And tonight's speaker is Sarah Beattie. She has a B.Ed and a graduate diploma in theology and an M.A. in aspects and implications of biblical interpretation. And she is currently finishing a PhD in hermeneutics at Melbourne University of Divinity. Sarah started her journey into innovative biblical interpretation as a way of helping adults understand the Bible. So over the last 20 years, she has facilitated and written material for small groups of Bible and theological study. And in doing so, she encountered increasing challenges from the impact of science on Christian belief. And as she went deeper, she discovered that the metaphors of science can be imaginatively linked to the text in ways that can both make the text more strange and therefore less predictable, and can aid our understanding and our dialogue with science. So this talk follows on well from last week's one by Tom McLeish, where he also emphasized imagination and depth. Sarah's PhD thesis focuses on the interpretation of biblical narrative in the 21st century world, and this thesis is almost finished. Although her background is in the arts, Sarah believes that all Christians are now to some extent Christians in science, due to the rapid developments in and growing dependence upon science and technology. This should not, however, be a threat to traditional belief, she says, but rather offers an exciting opportunity to explore how science can contribute to a deeper understanding of biblical reality. Sarah lives in Wellington in New Zealand. She has a married son also in Wellington, and daughter Emily, who's with her now, who belongs in Melbourne and is stuck in New Zealand, and a mother in England. So she spends a lot of time traveling between these centres. So before Sarah begins, Sylvia is going to pray for us all. Thanks, Sylvia. Oh, you need to unmute. Yeah, okay. Yeah, good.
My prayer tonight is based on Psalm 4, verse 6. Let the light of your face shine on us, O Lord. This is a night prayer. Sorry. I rest in you, O God. I am in your safe keeping. Body and soul held in peace. My heart cries out to you, my God. All that upsets me, you see. All that disturbs me, you understand. Only here in your presence am I fully known. I am wrapped in grace. I rest in you, O God. I am in your safe keeping, body and soul held in peace. In the stillness, the light of your face shines. My heart turns to gratitude and is glad. I have more than enough. You, Lord, are more than enough. I rest and sleep, safe and sound. I rest in you, O God. I am in your safe keeping, body and soul held in peace. Be with us as we share, O Lord, and as we rest. That our learning, our thinking, and all our being may be held in you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sylvia. So, Sarah.
I am going to try and share my screen. Is that what I do now?
Yes, that's right. That's right. It's all good. Yep.
Yep. Which one? Share. Just going to. Are we there?
Yes.
I am floating at the top. Can I down to the bottom?
You can. No, just have to stay there.
I'm moving down to the bottom.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm floating there. Does that screen work? Has everybody got that screen? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have to make it larger. I can just, and I move on like that. Okay, I am new to doing this on Zoom and I'm new to this computer. So I'll just say that at the beginning in case, but I have my technician beside me, so hopefully she can put me right if it all goes wrong. And now I'm going to stick to my script because if I don't, I'll go off on tangents and I won't get to where I want to be. So thank you, first of all. It's a great privilege to be offering some thoughts tonight on ancient light and how it might illuminate science and theology. I've been able to listen to all but one of the talks so far, and it's been a great privilege, as I say, to be part of this. So thank you to ISCAST and to New Zealand Christians in Science for what you're doing. And I'm hoping that what I'm going to say tonight will connect a little bit with last week and some of the things that Chris said in his talk the other week. So there's no more to do. I want to start with this astonishing world that we live in. And this picture here from the Hubble, which is, the description is that it's a photo of a small portion of one of the largest seen starburst regions in the galaxy. It's the Carina Nebula. And towers of cool hydrogen laced with dust rise from the wall of the nebula. The pillar is also being pushed apart from within as infant stars buried inside it fire off jets of gas that can be seen streaming from towering peaks. So we live in an astonishing world. I just want to go back to start, though, with something that the physicist Werner Heisenberg said. He claimed that to progress with quantum mechanics and interpret quantum reality, physicists had to learn how to both ask the right questions and get into the spirit of quantum theory. And in the presentation tonight, I want to suggest that we might also have to learn how to ask the right questions and rediscover how to get into the spirit of biblical narrative in order to interpret a biblical perspective of reality in the 21st century. I want to suggest that a way of doing this might be found in the conceptual similarities that seem to be emerging in the way that we interpret some of the discoveries of science, particularly in the area of cosmology and astrophysics, and the way that we might interpret biblical narrative. This is in relation to what philosopher Thomas Nagel calls the true extent of reality in an astonishing world that is independent of and extends beyond the reach of our minds. A world in which science has revealed, in Nagel's words, facts that are beyond the current limits of our understanding, but are also potentially beyond the scope of our conceptual ability, raising the issue of the relation between facts and conceptual schemes or systems of representation. So I'm going to use the concept of ancient light to think about some similarities between the challenge to articulate some of the discoveries in science and the challenge that the biblical writers also faced. This is in attempting to articulate a new and at times counterintuitive perspective of the nature of the world within the limitations of language. Limitations that are highlighted by Nagel, who states that as our knowledge of the world increases, and I quote here, while it's risky to use existing language to reach beyond its existing limits, we are compelled to do so again and again, however inadequately, in our recognition that our understanding of reality is so limited. Now, we also appear to be increasingly compelled to return to story to help with understanding. And I was interested to find a science writer who suggests that, and I quote him, we can hardly talk about quantum theory as we have mathematics, but not stories. And he cites a physicist who believes that we will one day tell a story about quantum mechanics, literally a story all in plain words that is so compelling and so masterful in its imagery that the mathematics of quantum mechanics in all its exact technical detail will fall out as a matter of course. That story, he says, should not only be crisp and compelling, it should also stir the soul. So the imagination and the concept of story appear therefore to continue to be significant forces for contemporary scientific endeavour. And of course, last week, Einstein was mentioned as somebody who put an enormous focus on the imagination. Now, according to cognitive scientist Mark Turner, story or narrative imagining is a fundamental instrument of the mind and a literary capacity that is indispensable to human cognition as both a fundamental form of predicting and a fundamental cognitive instrument for planning and explanation. Story and projection are therefore the root of and essential to human thought and two of our basic forms of knowledge. Now, if this is correct, I believe that a key question concerns how a deeper understanding of the purpose of story might facilitate a renewed appreciation for how the biblical writers' plain words and compelling and masterful imagery resulting from a broad and liberated imagination might be able to once again stir the soul in the search for a better understanding of the human condition and, in Nagel's words, how we fit into the world in which we live. So tonight, on a rather whirlwind journey, given the time constraints, I want to look briefly at firstly the role of story in science and theology, using the concept of ancient light and the theme of birth in the heavens. And then secondly, at an interpretive approach that's based on the idea of radical departure from familiar ways of thinking, and a departure that uses imaginative alternatives to extend what we might think of as the boundaries of the thinkable. So I'm going to start with this idea of birth in the heavens and look at these three pictures really, two from the Hubble on either side, and I think it's certainly the left of my screen, so I hope it's the left of everybody's. There's a 1995 infrared image of the pillars of creation. This is in the Eagle Nebula, about 6,500 light years away from Earth, and it reveals three towers of dust that are described on the Hubble website as giving birth to new stars buried within their dusty spires. On the far side is the 2011 image of the Monkey Head Nebula, and that reveals another stellar nursery or star-forming region about 6,400 light years away from Earth, in which bright newborn stars near the center of the nebula illuminate the surrounding gas with energetic radiation. Now, the light detected from these newborn stars is, as Chris pointed out a few weeks ago, ancient light, which has been traveling for nearly 6,500 years before reaching the eyes of the Hubble telescope. The images that have been produced therefore reflect an ancient birth story that occurred in this case about 6,500 years ago. Now, the narrative images, and of course we don't have pictures, but I couldn't resist this 14th century beautiful illustration. These narrative images from Revelation 12, and this is the opening of the chapter in verses 1 to 4, they also reflect an ancient birth story. But the sense of radiant illumination emerges here from a vision that reveals a radically different celestial phenomenon from those emerging within contemporary astronomy. It's a vision that's been described as emerging almost like a constellation coming to life in the evening sky. But the light that appears in the narrative in this darkness radiates from a luminous woman who is clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Now, despite the resemblance to a high goddess or a cosmic queen conceived in astral categories, there are significant differences from her mythic counterparts, indicating that the narrative, while combining material from a variety of sources, which include Jewish tradition and the Old Testament, will be a radical departure from the familiar for its early hearers and readers. Now, the importance of an awareness of this sense of departure is highlighted in a warning about the danger of a reductive approach, and I quote here, of getting so involved in trying to uncover the sources of John's images and the historical and political reference that one fails to see the overarching vision that John is presenting. One may dissect the text to such an extent that one ends up with a cadaver rather than a living text that continues to inspire, challenge, and embrace the reader. So the radiant image of the woman in the narrative serves to illuminate the importance of the child that she will bear, who will provide a different form of illumination as a light that will overcome the darkness of evil. In this respect, the contrast with and radical departure from the depiction of the woman in Genesis 3, who there as the first mother of humankind was clothed only with fig leaves and then a garment of skin, is a significant feature of the vision. A feature that highlights the unique nature of the birth that is about to occur, which is also indicated by the echoes of Psalm 104, in which God is described as being wrapped in light as with a garment. The ties to the Genesis narrative are not, however, broken, with a link remaining as the woman cries out in the promised agony of giving birth. But she must now face a destructive force of darkness, which appears as a ravenous cosmic beast in the form of a great red dragon. Now, ravenous cosmic beasts have also appeared in our 21st century cosmology. This is an image from 2019 from the Event Horizon Telescope collaboration, which is an international network of radio telescopes that are linked together to create a giant virtual telescope with an aperture that almost equals the diameter of the Earth. And data from the 8 telescopes at the time was synchronized and combined to create a composite set of images. And this image here was the first silhouette of a supermassive black hole, about 55 million light years from Earth, and about 6.5 billion times the mass of the Sun. It was described as having an eye of fire. And the black hole is outlined by the glowing hot gas surrounding its event horizon. And it was referred to in one article as the behemoth at the heart of galaxy M87. Now, amongst the most mysterious objects in the universe, this ravenous cosmic beast of 21st century science that drags passers-by to certain doom is an extremely dense entity with such strong gravitational pull that anything coming within its event horizon or point of no return will be consumed and never re-emerge. And I'm using this language from different articles that were written about it. In 2017, a record-breaking black hole feeding frenzy was announced as another giant black hole located in a small galaxy about 2 billion light years from Earth was reported as having ripped apart a nearby star and then continued to feed off its remains for close to a decade. Now, this image that we have here was only possible because of the development of very long baseline interferometry to detect radio waves or light in a region of the electromagnetic spectrum which is invisible to the naked human eye. Human sight is normally limited to the stars in our Milky Way galaxy, which within a range of about 1,500 light years are observable on a clear night. On March the 19th, 2008, for a period of roughly 40 seconds, it was, however, possible for the naked human eye to witness the most distant astronomical object ever directly seen, with a supernova or gigantic stellar explosion that happened so far away that its light took 7.5 billion years to reach Earth. Detected by NASA's SWIFT satellite, the luminous explosion in the form of a gamma ray burst occurred 3 billion years before our solar system formed. It's consequently been called an echo from the beginning of time. But in a news conference following the sighting, an astrophysicist was reported as referring to the event as the scream or birth pangs of a black hole. It was a birth that heralded the dramatic formation of an entity that would require a radical departure from familiar forms of explanation, with the laws of physics appearing to break down as space and time are broken apart, in a region where space is so curved as to collapse in on itself and where time comes to a standstill. Now, the cosmic region in Revelation 12, in which the cry of birth pangs resounds, is also one in which no physical laws can be applied, as the narrative makes its own radical departure from the familiar to an imaginative alternative at a point in time and space that is not identifiable within contemporary cosmology. I couldn't resist this wonderful William Blake painting here, just to have an image to show this. The cosmic drama that unfolds in the narrative presents the modern reader, and I quote here, with something like a movie that thrills audiences with special effects as heroes and villains traverse the galaxies in battles for control of the universe. Now, these are visions, despite the picture, which from the perspective of the hearer or reader are invisible, not only to the naked human eye, but also to any form of advanced technology, and cannot therefore either respond to the questions directed to modern cosmology or be understood by the existing methods used to explain it. The imagery is instead addressed to the imagination of the hearer or reader as a cosmic beast that is powerful enough to cast constellations from the sky appears seeking to devour the child as soon as it was born. Now, the imagery of this narrative, while perhaps familiar in some respects to the first audiences in its echo of ancient mythologies, is, however, a dramatic reformulation of an imaginative alternative to the combat myths that were widespread in the ancient Near East and classical world. Despite its mythological resonance, it can be argued that much of the imagery of this draconic creature and storyline in the narrative can be explained on the basis of allusions to the Old Testament and Christian tradition. There is a developmental trajectory from the serpent of the Eden narrative, who, whilst originally a creature that is part of God's creation, and then a seemingly rational and convincing ally until it's exposed as the initiator of humanity's estrangement from God, has now in the Revelation narrative evolved into an overtly aggressive and destructive adversary. The enmity between the woman and the serpent in Genesis 3 reappears with dramatic intensity as the life of her child is threatened, and the serpent dragon is now portrayed as the representation of all that is evil and chaotic and in opposition to God. Now, if we return to our ravenous 21st century beast, the language that's used to refer to black holes as fiery, ravenous cosmic beasts is not, of course, intended to imply that they represent evil in the form of being morally bad, wicked, or intentionally tending to do harm. Despite their use in popular culture as metaphors for death and destruction, they appear to function as gravitational engines at the center of some galaxies, which use matter to create light in converting gravitational potential energy into radiant energy. Matter accelerating towards the event horizon of the black hole emits high energy electromagnetic radiation that is able to outshine the whole galaxy, leading to what has been suggested to be an irony of astrophysics, in that something so dark can lead to so much light. So I want to look at this concept of light in the darkness, because it's a concept in emerging from and overcoming darkness that's a key biblical theme. But in contrast to the involuntary violence of the dark cosmic beast of astrophysics, the biblical dragon serves to represent the dark destructive power of an invisible but intentional source of evil that is a threat to the world in which God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Its initial presentation in the Genesis narratives in the form of the subtle and persuasive reasoning of a seemingly benevolent serpent gives little indication of the powerful creature that it will become. But the severity of the consequences of capitulation to the lure of self-advancement provides a warning about human fallibility. The newly acquired knowledge and ability to be like God did not lead the first biblical couple to the promised freedom and power, but resulted in the fracturing of relationships between humankind, the world, and the other species within it, fractures that do not appear to have healed in the troubled and fragile 21st century world. As Nagel points out, we still do not really know how to live together and have been given ample reason to fear human nature. Astronomer Royal Sir Martin Rees describes the 21st century as the first era in 45 million centuries in which the human species can determine for good or ill the future of its entire biosphere, as the threats to our world come from ourselves rather than nature. He describes the human brain as the most complicated thing we know about in the universe, and he makes the thought-provoking suggestion that some of the best understood phenomena are actually far away in the cosmos, while the everyday phenomena, especially those involving entities as complex as human beings, can be more intractable than anything in the inanimate world. An interesting example of this intractability can be found in the suggestion that some of the biggest challenges for the Event Horizon Telescope collaboration have been and may remain social rather than technical, with the chair of Harvard's Department of Astronomy stating that, and I quote, "The biggest achievement of this project is being able to coordinate different observatories in different countries around the world, as astronomers are quite competitive, and convincing hundreds of them to work together and figure out who the leader is, why that person should be the leader, and how they should all get credit is quite a challenge." So while it may be hoped that developments in science and technology, together with education and institutional reform, will provide solutions to the issues we currently face, in 2012, 2 Australian and Swedish philosophers argued that the radical transformation of our social and natural environments by advanced scientific technology has exposed a fundamental flaw in the human condition, as, and I quote, "human beings are not by nature equipped with a moral psychology that empowers them to cope with the moral problems that these new conditions of life create." This led them to conclude that addressing the current challenges of global climate change, weapons of mass destruction, and widening economic inequality, to which we can, of course, now add a global pandemic, will require major behavioral adjustments that our moral dispositions may render us incapable of making. They therefore suggested, with chilling Huxleyan undertones, that we must now consider applying technology to our own nature in the form of moral bioenhancement, or a nice pill that will enable us to make the necessary adjustments. Now, the fundamental question of whether human altruism and or technological endeavor are sufficient to restore the broken relationships that exist both amidst humankind and between humanity, the environment, and other species, appear, however, to remain unanswered from a secular perspective. Regardless of their origin, the forces of chaos remain rampant and continue to do harm, exposing vulnerability and generating fear about the future. To an increasingly secular world, the biblical response to these forces presents the potentially unpalatable challenge that human agency alone will never be enough to overcome them. The biblical representation of evil in the form of a mythical creature offers, however, hope in the possibility of resistance. In establishing evil as a separate but dependent entity that is reliant on being able to feed on the potential for evil within the human condition, it becomes an outer as well as an inner force. It is therefore a force that can be resisted, which from a biblical perspective is due to its ultimate defeat that lies at the heart of the biblical narratives, a defeat that is initiated in the incarnation narratives, brought about in the crucifixion and resurrection narratives, and definitively concluded in the narratives of Revelation. So I want now to look at the spectrum of light from both the perspective of theology and science. Because the defeat of the forces of darkness by the light of Christian hope is a key feature of the Revelation narrative. But it is a light that, if not extinguished in contemporary societies, appears for many to have grown increasingly dim. I want to suggest that an interpretive approach of informed receptivity, and by that I mean that we can take our information, we can take our knowledge, we can take what we have learned through science and technology, But we can add to that a receptivity to the text. We can be prepared to come to it and to listen to it and to learn from it. And an approach that adopts the concepts of radical departure from the familiar, that extends the boundaries of the thinkable, offers, I believe, a potential way forward to the discovery of the full spectrum light of Christian hope that emerges from biblical narrative. In this respect, I want to suggest that the vision of the woman, dragon, and child portrayed in Revelation 12 has conceptual similarities to the image of radiant light that we see in this image of Cassiopeia A supernova that was produced by the Fermi collaboration in 2011. Now, what we have here is a composite image, and it reveals the light of the full electromagnetic spectrum. The gamma rays from NASA's Fermi Gamma Ray Space Telescope are shown in magenta. X-rays from NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory in blue and green. The visible light data captured by the Hubble Space Telescope is shown in yellow. Infrared data from NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope is shown in red. And the radio data from the Very Large Array is shown in orange. Now, of course, contemporary cosmology does not explain John's cosmic visions, but the image does potentially offer an insight into how biblical narrative uses imagery which traverses the full spectrum of theological light in order to present aspects of reality that are invisible to the naked eye. Seeing the light from the perspective of the Revelation narrative is not, however, reliant on the visual and dependent on the development of advanced technology. For all its apparent concreteness and vividness, the imagery of apocalyptic writing is essentially non-visual and non-pictorial. While such writing appears to paint specific pictures, the images are often almost impossible to put together into composite pictorial form, with the otherworldly or fantastic imagery suggesting a world that transcends ordinary reality. The reality of the biblical world is therefore portrayed in narrative that requires the hearer or reader to listen, rather than look, in order to learn about a reality that seems to defy the human experience of time and space. It is a requirement that has also, however, emerged in astrophysics, with the announcement in February 2016 that a new window on the universe had been opened with the detection of gravitational waves. And these, of course, are ripples in the fabric of space-time. It was only in 2015 that the existence of astronomy's cosmic beast could be confirmed, as the gravitational waves resulting from the collision and merger of two black holes about 1.3 billion years ago were detected when the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, and they're quite a mouthful to get that one out, but the observatory recorded the faint rising tone or flirting chirp of the now tiny ripples that were once waves resulting from the collision. According to the LIGO press release, these are waves which carry information about their dramatic origins and about the nature of gravity that cannot otherwise be obtained. The discovery of their existence has therefore been described as an inflection point that will change the course of science, as areas that are off limits to light can now be examined. In this respect, gravitational waves tell an unseen story, a story that we can hear but not see and must therefore listen to in order to better understand the reality of the vast cosmic landscape. The biblical story is also one that we can hear but not see, so must listen to in order to better understand the reality of the biblical landscape, a landscape that is first encountered as darkness covering the face of the deep until God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So, illuminating the darkness. According to Sir Martin Rees, from the perspective of science, I quote him, "We are linked to the cosmos. All living things depend on the stars. They are energized by the heat and light from the sun. They are made of atoms that were forged from pristine hydrogen billions of years ago in faraway stars." I want to suggest that the biblical perspective is similar, in acknowledging the link to the cosmos through our creation from the dust of the ground. Its unique point of difference is, however, that humankind is also made in the image of God, from whom the breath of life is given. It therefore gives humankind an additional dependency and source of energy that is manifest in the love of God, a transcendent love that is revealed through the redemptive act of incarnation in the birth, death, and resurrection of Christ. Now, there's debate about whether the book of Revelation was written during a period of violent persecution, or rather addresses the isolation and oppression that early Christians experienced due to the economic and social persecution and the consequent temptation to accommodate themselves to the economic, social, and political pressures of the dominant culture. Regardless of the situation, it offered a message of hope in troubled times. Hope that was not solely reliant on human resources to defeat the forces of chaos in whatever form they took. The current state of both our planet and human society indicates that Nagel is correct in suggesting that we have only reached a very primitive stage of moral development. His assumption that a much longer journey lies ahead of us is chilling, but his belief that it would be foolish to try to lay down in advance the outlines for a correct method for ethical progress is, I believe, challenged by the biblical narratives. In shedding biblical light in its varying forms on the vulnerability and fallibility of the human condition, they offer the possibility of and method for ethical progress and the restoration of broken relationships through the transformative creativity of a loving God. A transformative creativity which is inherent in humankind who are made in his image and activated by his spirit, thereby offering hope amidst the challenges of darkness in whatever form they take. It is this hope that resounds in the final chapter of the book of Revelation, in which the radiant light has finally defeated this darkness and is explained in the words, "It is I, Jesus, who am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star." Thank you. I hope that's stuck to time.
Yes, I know, that's wonderful. Thank you. Right on time. Do you want to unshare your radiant screen? And everybody who wants to ask a question, just use the chat function so that we can. Okay, Rosalinda, do you want to ask your question? Does everybody hear that? Okay, that sounds like some sort of ghost in the machine. But anyway, if Rosalinda isn't going to talk, she has asked, how does what we're learning from the stars support our understanding of the great creator? And while Sarah is answering that, you can all add your questions, which I know can be a little complex given the subject matter. Oh, Rosalinda can't unmute herself. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, Sarah, do you want to answer that question then?
I'm just thinking about it now.
Yeah.
Because it's not. I'm tempted to take the easy route from this one and say perhaps we talk to an astrophysicist about that one.
Or you could just say that's what you've been talking about for half an hour. Also, you could say that.
I thought that was my first response to this question, but I think it's a really good question because I think it takes it in a different direction actually to the one that I've been looking at. I'm really looking at the concepts that I think are emerging with some of the things that we're wrestling with as we learn about the stars. In terms of the great creator, I'd have to think, and I think a lot about that one to come up with an answer, and somebody here might have something that they can say instantly. Because of my background, which is predominantly arts, I tread with great respect in the area of astrophysics, and I try to be very careful with what I use. So there might be a physicist out there who would love to answer that question.
I know there is at least one physicist in the room, probably more. Yeah, yes, I can see more. David Mills moved. John Pilbrow. Matthew Pinson, you're there too. I think you've got physics in your background.
The physicists can unmute themselves.
I think that what I am increasingly wary of now is trying to find the right questions, because my experience of listening to people when they are struggling with biblical narrative and particularly the creation stories, it sometimes pits science against the biblical narrative, which I don't think. I think they can support each other, but it's a big question. So I've just seen another question.
Can I ask a question while everybody's... Oh no, somebody else has got a question. Peter, do you want to ask your question? Peter Tresham, can you unmute? Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. It was good to hear from you. My question was, like you were talking about the snake and the dragon and how these, how the snake brought, was a narrative of how corruption came into the world. So my question is, do you think that sin has impacted the physical creation in a similar way to how it has plagued humanity?
I think my first thought is our responsibility as stewards in the earth, the responsibility to look after creation. I think we can say that we haven't done that well. And I think what I love about those creation narratives is the development of human consciousness, that development of human awareness that came through that desire to have knowledge, that desire to be like God. And I don't think we've coped well with that. I think that the breaking of relationships that happened as I think it's sin crouches at the door as we go on into those Genesis narratives, where we have the first murder, we have the fracturing, the relationships with the other creatures, with the physical creation. So I think through our behavior is perhaps my answer to that.
Okay, yeah, because I'm sort of considering that not only it's our behavior, but this brokenness is also not only happened within us as human beings, but it's also happened within creation itself. So the snake and the dragon could be symbolic of that happening in the physical material world as well as within humanity.
In the forces of nature.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's a really interesting question. Yes, in separating. Yes, I think that's another thing to ponder. I think. Yes, thank you for that.
When you go out there into the universe, it does open the question of whether we are the only moral consciousness in the universe, and if we're not, what form does morality take out there? But the other question I have is that, I mean, as you say yourself, we haven't seemed to make much progress so far. So how do you and also Nagel think that we will perhaps overcome some of these more threshold problems that we so far are not really coming to grips with?
Sorry, can you just repeat that last bit? You went back to Nagel. Did you say how?
I think Nagel's saying, that we're at some sort of threshold and we have to overcome these problems, otherwise we won't survive. And you're saying something similar, but you're saying that the light of the gospel will help us, which of course is what we believe. But so far, it hasn't helped us as a species, so to speak. It hasn't helped us to overcome the problems that we are facing at the moment. So what would you say to that? I mean, yeah. I mean, it seems to help us as individuals and perhaps as little groups and families, but it hasn't yet perhaps produced the social glue that's going to help us to be, to overcome climate and the technologies that are about to break upon us, for example.
Well, the two philosophers that I mentioned, who came up with the idea of the nice pill,
yes,
they don't believe that we have advanced enough. We're still tribal, so we do just think about our immediate environment and our families, and that we're not. They don't believe we're capable of making decisions for 50 years in the future and doing things that we need to be doing. The thought of that, they do admit that who actually administers the nice pill is a problem in itself.
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
So,
well, I think these are questions that we can ponder. All of a sudden, of course, everybody is now coming up with questions. Christopher, do you want to give your question?
Sure. So, yeah, I was just broadly thinking, I mean, when people talk about the rapid pace of change today, I mean, it's not a new problem, but you come up with a solution to a problem, you end up creating new problems. So, I mean, for instance, extraction of hydrocarbons from the earth is a good example. Fantastic for the Industrial Revolution, powered a huge amount of change, but now we're just paying the dividends today in terms of global warming. And the solutions that people come up to the problems we face today, how do we know that we're not just sowing the seeds to future problems? So I guess it's a very complex question, but I guess just to narrow it down, how would you see biblical theology kind of talking into that sort of question or set of questions?
talking into about how we make good decisions for the future.
Yeah, more or less.
Given that we tend to create problems in overcoming solutions as well, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Gosh, I'm a slow thinker.
Everybody's slow, you see, because they're just coming up with all these questions now, which are quite complex.
I know, and I'm trying not to get distracted by those, because I'm trying to be able
don't look. Yeah.
to focus on them. I think that I mean, technology is creating these problems, isn't it? I mean, the more we learn, the more we find we're able to do. I think some of the biggest issues that we face in the future will be making the decisions about, I think there's a saying, isn't there? It's not what we can do, it's what we should do. And whether it needs groups of people from, I mean, I do personally believe we need much more interdisciplinary approaches to things now. I think we need to be utilizing the information. We are overloaded with information. We're in the information age now. And I think that's a very significant thing that we haven't quite worked out how to deal with. But I think we need conversations across the disciplines. We need to understand the impact. And Nicola kindly said I was about to finish the PhD. I wonder if I'll ever finish it, because so many things open up all the time. And to me, it's the interdisciplinary work that is so exciting, and the conversations across the disciplines. And I think that's possibly where we're going to find the answers if we can keep talking. That's not a good answer really to the question that you've raised, and somebody else might have a better response than me, but
Doro, do you want to give your question?
Thank you, Sarah. It's not a question; it's more of a comment. I thoroughly enjoyed your talk. I am interested in narratives, especially early Christian narratives, and listening to you, I was reminded of a beautiful image at the end of one of C.S. Lewis's novels, Perelandra, the image of the great dance, where there's this colloquium between angelic human beings and other non-human, non-rational, we say usually, beings, all of them having to sing a song to the Creator, all of them having to provide us with a lesson that we can learn. And you actually just touched on this topic a minute or so ago. So it's just a matter of expressing my gratitude for this approach, where it's not just a matter of knowing things, it's also a matter of learning lessons from whatever we know.
Well, look, thank you for that. And it sort of brings up a really important point to me, that I mean, we are so much more receptive today to the idea of story. One of the things I used to hear a lot is that now we know this, we can't believe that. And the idea that a lot of knowledge has sort of changed and these concepts of belief and truth and understanding are all quite slippery philosophical topics today, which is difficult for the Christian faith, because it talks about truth, and it has very certain ideas about them. But I think as we are learning to listen to the stories of our Indigenous people, and we are respecting different ways of finding truth, and story is no longer fantasy. Story is, we can tell it, we listen to individual stories, we recognize the subjective level, but we don't say it's not true. And I think that story for me, and when I read about scientists talking about the importance of story, I get quite excited. I don't know what physicists think about somebody saying the mathematics will drop away. You know, that I didn't say that, a physicist said it, but I think that's what seems to be coming now more and more. That, yeah, so thank you for that.
Great. Heather, do you want to give your question? Is Heather still here? Heather said, do you think that many of the Bible studies and sermons around today destroy and ignore the overarching story?
Sorry, I can't see that.
Now, do you think that many of the Bible studies and sermons around today destroy and ignore the overarching story? From Heather.
I can't. Oh, okay. Sorry, just say that to me again. I keep just by the place.
She's asking whether you think that maybe there are many Bible studies and sermons around today destroy and ignore the overarching story. I think she's asking whether or not everybody's doing what you're suggesting they do. And
sorry.
Yeah.
I don't want to be critical of the way people do things, but it is terribly important to me that we see this story that we have that begins in Genesis and finishes in Revelation. And it's the most wonderful journey, really, from the beginning of human consciousness through the story of who we are and how we hear, I believe. And I think I am passionate about the Old Testament. Actually, I've talked about Revelation today, but I think what I started to see being lost, I felt, was this foundation, this Old Testament foundation that the Christian faith sits upon, that I think is so important to understanding why the Christian faith is so important, why the gospel story, yes, is so powerful. But you need that, what comes before, to see how the continual failure of people to rebuild that relationship with God beforehand in the
Sylvia, are you still there?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you want to give your question?
Yeah, just following on from that, I'm really interested in how you kind of understand that, I guess, that process of biblical inspiration. I was super excited by what those parallels that you were putting up between vision and prophecy, and now this kind of radical emerging visions of our extreme telescopes peering into the cosmos, and that's fascinating to me. Did you have any more comments about what was going on for John as he had these visions and revelations, for instance?
Not probably that I could fit into tonight. For my thesis, I've lost half my screens. that was, for my thesis, I'm looking at 3 texts, one from Genesis, and then the last one is from Revelation. So I'm just really focusing on a small bit, and using these concepts of what happens if we bring the idea of radical departure from the familiar, to look at imaginative alternatives that stretch the boundaries of the thinkable. And I'm just saying, what happens if we come to the text with that idea that they are pushing us into unknown territory, really, to that when we need to come, we need to come with this receptiveness to the text, that we're going to allow it, we're going to listen to it, we're going to allow it to speak to us. But it doesn't mean we have to let go of everything that we know. And I get quite excited when I read things that are happening in science, and I think, well, yes, that concept's not that different, really. So
it's not so much that John saw a revelation of things that we now can see through telescopes, but it's more of you're interested in that kind of the parallels in the process about stepping beyond the knowable,
exactly,
and trying to put into the confines of text things that cannot be contained within text.
Exactly. I mean, we are limited by language. We call the most phenomenal event that we have in science a Big Bang. The whole formation of the universe in science is called a Big Bang. That's the best language we can do. And I love that. I think that it just makes us rethink, really. And what the biblical writers were inspired to do was to do something totally different. But they only had our language to do it. And I find it fascinating that we've had our Bible for so long, and it can still speak into so many situations despite the science. But I think the two can work together. So, nice. Sorry, that was a bit.
We're going to, as before, we will finish in a few minutes, but if anyone else wants to stay online and talk a bit further, we'll all stick around. Is that all right, Sarah? Stick around for a bit longer?
Yes, I don't think I'm doing a good job of answering questions, because they're all making me think, and I'm not somebody who can come out with instant answers.
Well,
I will go away.
You've given us such deep material, and it's a lot to think about. So we'll all go away and have dreams probably about these things. But we'll just talk a bit more. I was wondering, Jeff, would you mind saying a prayer for us before we finish? Jeff Whitaker, could you unmute yourself? Sorry to pounce on you like this.
Okay, let's pray together. Loving God, we thank you for the imaginative boost that we've received tonight to look at scripture in new ways and science in new ways. Lord, I think we'll go away excited by possibilities in our various areas of endeavour. So bless us as we cogitate on this material that we've heard. We're grateful for Sarah's contribution to us tonight, and life's exciting. Thank you, Lord. Amen.